Ever witnessed an animal mourning the loss of a human? You might not believe it, but it's true. Sometimes nature weaves bonds that surpass the complexities of the human spirit, connections that defy comprehension. I live in Pine Ridge, a quiet, snow-draped town nestled in the heart of the Colorado Rockies. My life revolved around long shifts and weary departures from the town hospital's emergency room. But one winter evening, my life took a completely different turn. That day, I was leaving the hospital after another grueling shift, like always. As snowflakes fell on my face, my pace slowed beneath the dim lights of the parking lot. That's when something caught my eye. A small shadow appeared in front of the hospital entrance, a lone bobcat kitten. Its fur dusted with frost. Its golden eyes were steady and knowing. It was as if it was asking a question that only I could answer. At first, it was just a strange occurrence, a fleeting curiosity. But the kitten started coming back every night. Its silent vigil remained unbroken. That's when I realized that this wasn't just a coincidence. What was it waiting for, and why did it refuse to leave? As the nights passed and the mystery deepened, I found myself drawn into something beyond logic, a connection that blurred the lines between human and nature, science and fate. Was this just an abandoned creature in need of help, or the start of something far greater? I'm Dr. Thomas Walker. This is a story of me and a bobcat kitten that I grew up in Pine Ridge. The silence of the mountains, the mystery of the forest, and the freedom of wildlife became an inseparable part of my life. My childhood was spent on nature walks with my dad, watching mountain goats and fishing in the rivers. Maybe that's why I had a special bond with animals. After graduating from medical school, I returned to my hometown and started working at the town hospital. The emergency room was a place where I faced the harsh realities of life. We fought a new battle every day on the fine line between death and life. But no matter how tiring it was, I loved my job. Helping people made my life meaningful. That winter, the first snow that blanketed the town changed everything. As I left the hospital after a long shift, I saw that tiny bobcat kitten. At first, I approached it with just a fleeting curiosity. But the meaningful expression in the kitten's eyes deeply affected me. It was as if it was trying to tell me something. The kitten started coming back every night. Shivering from the cold, it waited in front of the hospital entrance. I gave it food and water. It approached slowly, satisfied its hunger, and then returned to its vigil. I spent days and nights trying to decipher the meaning of this silent vigil. One day, Sarah, a nurse who worked at the hospital, noticed the situation. Sarah was a smart and sensitive woman I had worked with for years. Together, we decided to solve the mystery of the kitten. Sarah said, "Thomas, this is very strange. Wild animals don't usually do things like that for no reason. It's as if it's waiting for someone." She was right. The kitten didn't seem lost or helpless. On the contrary, it was focused on the hospital. As if it had a purpose. A few days later, I met an elderly woman who was visiting a patient at the hospital. This woman, named Martha, was talking to the kitten. I said to her, "Hello, ma'am. That's a wild animal. Be careful." Martha smiled and said, "I know, dear doctor, that's Edward's little shadow." Edward, this name stirred something within me. Martha was talking about a neighbor of hers, Edward Blackwood, who had recently passed away at the hospital. Edward was a retired wildlife biologist and had spent his last days raising a bobcat kitten. The pieces started to fall into place. The kitten was Max. Edward had found it as a lost kitten in a storm and had started taking care of it. Martha said, "Edward got along very well with animals. Max gave him a purpose in his final days. He was preparing Max for the wild, but his death changed everything." After learning Edward's story, I started to look at Max with different eyes. It was no longer just a wild animal, but also a symbol of a lost bond. It was looking for Edward. It couldn't leave the place where it had last seen him, the hospital. That night, I reviewed Edward's patient records at the hospital. Edward had been admitted to the hospital with a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. In his final days, he had constantly requested to be moved to a room facing the front of the hospital. It was as if he wanted to be in a place where Max could see him. This discovery deeply affected me. Even on the brink of death, Edward had thought of Max. He had wanted what was best for him. I found a diary that Edward had written for Max. The diary contained a detailed plan for preparing Max for the wild. Edward wanted to improve Max's hunting skills, keep him away from humans, and eventually release him in a safe area. However, his illness had prevented him from carrying out this plan. At that moment, I made a decision. I would complete Edward's plan and return Max to the wild. This was a debt I owed Edward. At the same time, it was an opportunity to give Max the freedom he deserved. For several weeks, I worked to prepare Max for the wild. With the help of a wildlife veterinarian, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, I gave Max special training to improve his hunting skills. I taught him to stay away from humans. Finally, we decided that Max was ready to be released into the wild. As stated in Edward's plan, we took him to a safe area deep in the forest. Max quickly adapted to his new home. He was exhibiting his hunting skills and staying away from humans. It was now a free bobcat. On the day Max was released into the wild, I had both joy and sadness in my heart. I was happy because I had given Max the freedom he deserved. I was sad because I would never see him again. However, I knew that Max would always live in my heart. His story taught me the power of nature, the importance of bonds we form with animals, and how valuable a promise is. After Max was released into the wild, I visited Edward's grave. I left a small bobcat statue on his grave. Edward, I kept my promise. I whispered, Max is now a free bobcat. Thanks to you, it will survive in the wild. Max's story became a legend in the town of Pine Ridge. People admired Max's loyalty, Edward's compassion, and the power of a promise. I, too, added a new meaning to my life. I continued to work in the emergency room, but now I paid more attention to animals. I knew that they, like humans, had emotions and needed help. And every night, as I left the hospital, I looked up at the sky. Maybe somewhere I imagined Max roaming freely. Although the story is fictional, it is based on facts. The bonds that animals form with humans have been scientifically proven. Animals can understand their owner's emotions, support them, and even mourn their loss. The rehabilitation of wild animals is an important issue. Returning injured or orphaned animals to the wild is vital for preservation of the ecosystem. You, too, should be sensitive to animals. Help them, protect them. Remember, animals are living beings like us, and we have responsibilities towards them. If you like this story, please subscribe to my channel and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more stories and information about animals. Remember, every living thing has a story, and sharing these stories can make the world a better place.